Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Paul Merzlach. I'm the editor-in-chief of the U.S. Naval Institute Proceedings magazine, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our first panel this morning of the Joint Warfighting Conference 2012, entitled Profession of Arms: How Do the Services Meet Tomorrow's Expectations and New Challenges? And I think the table was set for us a bit with the morning keynote discussion. Especially it struck me as General Walker mentioned finding the balance between education and training, and what is the right mix of education and training for our service members. How do we make sure that the lessons learned at such great cost over the last decade, how do we make sure those lessons actually are learned and are absorbed? And of course, hanging over everything as always, what will the looming budget cuts do to this? How will it affect the professional development of our services? Our panel this morning is going to attempt to answer those questions, and I can't think of a better group to take on those questions than our distinguished panel members, and led by our moderator, Major General Robert Scales, U.S. Army, retired. General Scales is one of America's best known and most respected authorities on land warfare. He's a graduate of West Point with a PhD in history from Duke. The general served in the Army for over 30 years. He commanded 2 units in Vietnam, earning the Silver Star for action during the Battle for Hamburger Hill in 1969. He then went on to serve in a variety of command and staff positions all over the world and ended his military career as the Commandant of the Army War College. In 1995, he created the Army After Next program, which was the Army's first attempt to build a strategic game and operational concept for future land warfare. Very prolific author, he's written several books, including Certain Victory, the official account of the Army in the Gulf War, Firepower in Limited War, a history of the evolution of firepower doctrine since the end of the Korean War, and Yellow Smoke, the future of land warfare for America's military. His latest work is The Iraq War, Military History, written with Williams and Murray. He's a consultant to senior leadership in both DoD and Congress. He's a military analyst for a number of news organizations, including BBC, National Public Radio, and he has written for many different news outlets, quoted in New York Post, Wall Street Journal, Washington Times, but the one I would say I'm most proud of is his article that appeared in Proceedings in February of 2010, which was entitled Too Busy to Learn, in which the general looked at the effects of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and what kind of effect that may have had on the professional education of our officer corps. So as we've seen, when General Scales writes, people read. I know I certainly do. Full disclosure, I'm a big fan. I'm not ashamed to say that. And when he speaks, I listen. So I think with that, I'll stop talking now and let the General speak.
Thank you very much, Paul, and good morning to you all. It's a great pleasure to be back here at FCA and have an opportunity to moderate another panel. It's really terrific. I am particularly pleased at the topic today, which is the profession of arms. How do the services meet tomorrow's expectations? Timing is everything in the military. And it seems to me over the last 200 years or so in all the militaries of the world, change, shifts in the paradigm of change in the preparation of war begins as wars wind down and end, and either accelerate or diminish during the interwar period. You may recall General von Seck's famous service-wide AAR in 1919 that led eventually to the development of mounted warfare in the 20s and 30s in the German Army. Marine Lieutenant Colonel Ellis, who in the interwar period was the author of a doctrine that developed large-scale amphibious operations in preparation for the war in the Pacific. Many of you, obviously, in this room are familiar with Admiral Sims and Moffett and their battle against the battleship admirals and their advocacy of large deck carrier aviation. Lieutenants and captains in the late 20s and early 30s at the Air Tactical School at Maxwell Air Force Base, people with names like Spots and Arnold, birthed the whole concept about strategic air power in the coming war. But the news isn't always good. All too often, perhaps more often than not, militaries tend to get it wrong. For a minute, what comes to mind is the French development of the methodical battle after the end of the First World War, an attempt by the French Army to make yesterday perfect and at the same time prepare poorly for the coming war. The Imperial Japanese Navy's obsession with offensive naval warfare, which worked great up for the first 6 months of the war, but after midway, the Japanese Navy could never adapt to defending the empire. And my own service, my own generation, the discovery of the operational level of war by the Army in the early 70s and the development of air-land battle and FM 100-5 operations. And yet at the same time, at the same period of our history, the Army walked away from counterinsurgency doctrine and had to reinvent it after the march to Baghdad in 2003. So I would submit to you this morning that all services and all four gentlemen sitting to my left are faced with the beginning of this process as our wars wind down and as we move into the interwar period for all of us. And the question is, if we're at this strategic inflection point, how well will we do? Will we succeed or will we fail? You know, Elliot Cohen talks about the three essential elements of transformation being lessons learned, contemporary history, and the ability to anticipate the future through gaming. How well are the services prepared to use those intrinsic tools to look into the future? Are we going to get it right in each of our services? Or are we, like the French, going to make yesterday perfect? And I'm extremely pleased to have four gentlemen, each of whom represents the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marine Corps, each of whom is intimately involved in the beginning of this process and who will speak to you today. And I'll introduce them very briefly. Major General Tom Anderson is the commander of the LeMay Center for Doctrine Development. He's a Air Force Academy graduate, 1980. He commanded the Flying Training Squadron and an operations group. He's held key personnel or positions in the Air Staff, the Joint Staff, the Combat Command Staffs, and in NATO. His last assignment was Director of Requirements for the Headquarters Air Combat Command. He's a master navigator with over 3,500 hours in bomber reconnaissance and electronic warfare aircraft. Next is Rear Admiral John Christensen. He is the 53rd President of the Naval War College, a Naval Academy graduate, class of 81. He's a surface warfare officer with service in destroyers and frigates, culminating in the command of the USS McCluskey. He served in several professional military education assignments to include Surface Warfare Officer School and the Naval Academy, where he was, in addition to being an instructor, and probably more important to my alma mater, the Military Academy, he was the soccer coach at Annapolis. Major General John Crowley graduated from Naval ROTC at the University of South Carolina in 1977. He is a pilot. He was on active duty for 7 years as a Cobra pilot, and like a recurring part of his career, he was recalled several times to active duty, first in Desert Storm as an ops officer of an attack helicopter squadron. He was recalled for Iraq as part of Marine Air Group 42. He commanded U.S. Marine Forces South in Miami, and was later commander of the 4th Marine Aircraft Wing in New Orleans. Most importantly, of course, is he is a pilot for American Airlines, and after this is over, I'm going to bug him for an upgrade. Last is Colonel Bill Hicks. He's the Director of Concept Developments and Learning Directorate in TRADOC, a job I used to have years ago. A USMA graduate, 9th class of '81, a warrior, and a strategist and intellect. His operational assignments include assignments in the 82nd and the 101st Airborne Division in the 1st Special Forces Group. His wartime service includes commander of the Afghan Regional Security Integration Command SAF and chief of strategy of the multinational force Iraq. And one of those rare instances, perhaps not so rare nowadays, is he wears among his many awards and decorations a star on his combat infantryman's badge. So without further ado, Tom?
All right. Sir, thanks for that. On behalf of my boss, Lieutenant General Dave Fadock, who is the first president and probably about 39th commander of the Air University, as he likes to say, it's a pleasure to be on this panel. What I thought I'd do is I'd give you a real brief snippet of what we do at Air University in terms of where the organizations are, and then talk about some of our challenges. First of all, we have all enlisted, and the officer PME there, that goes all the way through War College, Air Command and Staff, and then our strategic Air Power Studies Group, which is analogous to SAMS. We have the Air Force Institute of Technology, which does our master's level and PhD level degrees, that it's Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. We have the Air Force Research Institute that's located there, and then I'm, of course, part of the Doctrine Center where we do doctrine development outreach. And I don't say that to brag about it, but we're ideally organized to get some of this stuff done. Really no excuse if we can't get it done. And we hope to leverage a lot of that. We are not a direct report to the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. We go through Air Education and Training Command, our four-star commander down there, General Ed Rice, and then eventually it gets to the headquarters Air Force. As far as challenges, where we want to go in the next few years, I think the word relevance is probably the one that gets our attention the most. And no matter what we do, that budget is looming. And we have to figure out how we can describe the return on investment for education. It is different than training. We like to say training's for now, education's for the future, education's for the unknown, training's for the known. But unless we can capture the value of what we're doing in education, then we're always going to be fighting for the precious dollars. I like to say that we have to convince our bosses, we have to convince the Air Force that education is an investment. It's not an expense, and the more relevant you are, obviously, the easier it is to make that case. General Scales talked about the Air Corps Tactical School. We've had some great history there. Obviously, it was before the Air Force was the Air Force. We were still part of the Army back in the late 20s and the 30s, but we're using that model most recently for cyber. We're trying to create something that's analogous to the Air Corps Tactical School. It would be a cyber axe. We have a lot of centers of gravity, again, with AFIT, with our Research Institute, with our 24th Air Force. This is not a DoD-wide consortium we're trying to put together, but it's focused on cyber. It's focused within the Air Force, and we're just trying to get our arms around it. And the theme of that is, how do you advance cyber thought? We think it's probably as much in its infancy as air power was in the late 20s. And so that's something that we're really attacking right now, and we should have something to show for it probably in the next 2 or 3 months. And then the other thing I want to bring up before I pass this on is the need to develop critical and strategic thinkers. We hear that all the time. We need more critical thinkers. And my retort is, what's a critical thinker? I mean, do we have a checklist? Are there 20 little boxes you check? If we get the 20 boxes checked, then do you create somebody, put a forehead on or a stamp on their forehead, say you're a critical thinker? What do you do with it? We're starting to use the word disruptive thinkers. And disruptive isn't bad, but disruptive has more to do with the leadership for those critical. Anybody can be a critical thinker, not anybody. You could be a critical thinker and you couldn't be used. But what we need is we need to find critical thinkers that then can be unleashed, that will have superiors let them be critical thinkers without endangering their careers and trying to advance future causes. And so with that, I think I'll just pass it on, and hopefully we'll get some good questions.
John?
It's great to be here. I want to thank Naval Institute and FCA. We got to ask a question. It's how do the services prepare for tomorrow's expectations and meet new challenges? So I just came up with 3 quick answers. Read, educate, and think. I'm the president of the Naval War College, so obviously I'm going to be coming at it from that angle. So starting with the first one, read. I thank Naval Institute. I brought the 2. I should have known there'd be hundreds of copies here, but these are, I'm a life member. I've been reading since I was in kindergarten. These are great publications. I think the first way you prepare for the future and new challenges is by reading. And I don't care how good computers get or how fun iPhones become, there's no substitute for sitting down, making the time to read. And these issues and these magazines have been really something to be proud of my entire naval career. Second is, well, I want to talk about 2 choices. Start time 3-1. There's 2 choices. The last speakers talked a lot about choices. The 2 choices I confront a lot at the War College are the action versus education. General Scales talked about it. Action versus education. I don't really see these as choices, though. They're balancing acts. And we've always got to make sure that no matter what our nation is engaged in, we're balancing the choices between going to where the action is, which is a perfectly admirable quality, but also demanding that we educate our force. The second big choice is the people who do technology. It's kind of a perfect blending of the co-sponsors here. The people who do technology and the people who do education. The Naval War College was founded because Admiral Luce thought that the guys who were doing technology were getting too much in charge. You know, we got rid of sails and came up with turbines. We got rid of, you know, boarding swords and got rifled munitions. Those guys were running the Navy, and he thought that was a mistake because human nature doesn't change. And what the Naval War College seeks to do, and what all of us up here I think are pretty much believers in education, is the way you prepare for new challenges, unknown challenges, is to study human nature, because we believe that is unchanging. The second how is to educate, and that's our mission at the Naval War College. Our first and foremost mission is to educate the future leaders, and it used to be of the Navy, but more and more we're a joint college with, and have great strength brought to us by the fact that we have the Army, the Marine Corps, and the Air Force, and the agencies there with us at the Naval War College. We study history, we study planning, and we study cooperation. Those are kind of the big 3 things. You walk out of the War College, you will understand military history, starting with the Peloponnesian War. You'll understand how we do military planning. That is what separates us from other organizations in the military, so we know how to plan to get something done. And finally, it's cooperation, whether it's with the other services or the other nations. Our Navy's strategy is a cooperative strategy for the 21st century, and we teach that at the War College. And the final answer to that question, how to prepare for the unknown for the future, is to think. And that's one of our biggest charges, is to think hard about the future and to think in detail about the future. We have a proud history in Newport. We've heard it repeatedly this morning, but the analogy between aviation and cyber. The War College was famous in the 20s and 30s for wargaming. How do you apply a discipline to thinking about the future? One way is through wargaming. In the 20s and 30s, every war game we did at the War College involved battleships, with the knowledge that, but we know air power is going to play. We're waiting for someone to tell us how. Similarly, today, we know we're going to need the traditional military capabilities that we have, but we also know that cyber is going to come in some unexpected way, and we're thinking hard about that in the future. And then just to wrap up, rigor. My final comment is in all that, we want the Newport to not be a good place to be at. We want it to be a good place to be from. So we read hard, we work hard, we write hard, we have demanding exams. They haven't come up to me, but if you came to Newport and didn't like your time there, please tell me. Most people love it. My late mother used to say, you have to work hard at having fun. In other words, taking vacation and sitting on the couch is no fun. You have to work hard at education. You got to come to Newport and work hard. It's not a year off, it's a place to work hard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. John?
Good morning. My name is John Crowley on behalf of Lieutenant General Dennis Halick, my boss at Marine Forces Command. Welcome. I'm really excited to see several junior officers and senior officers in the audience collecting this information, as well as my friends, new and old faces, and some new old faces out there, and delighted to be with you today. In representing the Marine Corps perspective, or the Naval Expeditionary perspective this morning, it's no small coincidence that John and I sit close together, because the challenges that are ahead of us in the future really will need to be addressed by, we understand very clearly, naval power, and that certainly includes our friends at the Coast Guard, and they're here as well, and they're always considered in our planning. Especially in my other role, I'm the commander of Marine Forces South, the component commander to Southcom, and I work in the 33 countries of Latin America, everything south of Mexico, and an honor to do so. If I would use one theme here this morning in just talking about the challenges for the United States Marine Corps and our naval service, it would be balance in this time. As we transition out of a authorized strength of around 202,000 and look to the number that our target, we did not put a mark on the wall and try to work to a number. We looked at the capability that we would offer the Republic, and we think we're well balanced for that in looking out to the out years. Other fiscal constraints surround that number, and we're concerned about that, but we think in where we are today that we're well balanced. What does that mean? That means in looking across the spectrum of conflict, we need to be able to do anything from a full-scale contingency as we transition out of today to those types of security cooperation and mentorship programs that we work so closely with our partner nations. So we look forward to your questions up here, and thank you for having us.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here. One point that General Scales did not mention is that I have been twice promoted by admirals. Ed Jim Bassiani promoted me from lieutenant colonel to colonel, and I had the honor of Admiral Mullen, when he was the chairman, promoted me to 1-star when I was the J7. So I have some passing experience with the naval tradition. As touched on in the introduction, the Army has come through a number of transitions, both successfully and in some cases far less so. Intellectual investment, experimentation built the foundation for our units and operations that delivered victory in World War II, but we were far less successful in its aftermath. However, we did make a successful transition coming out of Vietnam, informed in part by certainly an operational, if not strategic, inflection in the '73 Arab-Israeli War, which we studied closely, and then concerted institutional and operational challenges in doctrine organization to include the formation of the command that I belong to, our Training and Doctrine Command, as well as training, equipment, and leadership over the coming 2 decades. Today, we're coming out of more than a decade of conflict along with our partners in the other services, and we in the Army recognize that we are yet in another period of transition. So building on our history, both successes and failures, we have and continue to invest in intellectual examination through wargaming, looking at near, mid, and far problems conceptually, and experimentation where we look at transitioning those concepts into something that actually can be executed on the ground. This includes the use of experimental forces in a variety of our training bases and also out at Fort Bliss, Texas, and affecting changes in our formations, training doctrine, and a renewed focus on the institutional side of the Army. While we are an Army in transition, we are shifting from an Army of execution, fighting 2 wars, to one that has to balance, and I think that's an important word that's been used already, continued execution in Afghanistan, recovery from those 2 wars, and probably most importantly, preparation for today and tomorrow's threats. To strike this balance, we are also facing the challenges of a changing strategy, changing operational environment, and a changing fiscal environment, which may be our greatest challenge. And in that regard, we have to make sure that the Army retains its credibility through this period of transition, that it's the right size, that it remains ready, and that it remains modernized in key areas. We think that a credible Army provides the combatant commanders and the nation with the depth and resiliency and probably most importantly, versatility to be decisive across a range of missions that are assigned as announced by the President earlier this year in the strategy announcement at the Department of Defense. With credibility, the Army is able to prevent conflict, in particular by helping our potential adversaries avoid miscalculation, shape the strategic environment through mill-to-mill exchanges, and building partner capacity to secure cooperation and strengthen alliances, and partnerships that facilitate our access and enable nations to better secure their regions. When you look at the armed forces of the world, most of the nations in the Pacific, interestingly, are actually run by Army forces. That's where the preponderance of their force investment is, and we provide a unique entree for the nation to enable the joint force to operate successfully out there. And then finally, when we have to win decisively and dominantly across the full range of operations, this includes regular and irregular warfare, support to homeland defense, support to our civil authorities, humanitarian assistance, air and missile defense, again a key capability in the Pacific and the Middle East, two areas that our nation continues to emphasize, counterterrorism, joint entry operations, countering WMD, and preventing their proliferation, and when necessary, stability operations. So as you can see, strategic guidance has tasked the Army with a wide range of missions. Our capabilities development, capacity, readiness, and modernization focus on ensuring we can counter terrorism, irregular warfare, and defeat aggression, and maintain a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent. We contribute to that, in particular with the missile defense capabilities that we have in CONUS, as well as those based outside the United States, and defend the homeland and provide support to our civil authorities. But we have to retain, and we will retain, the depth, breadth, and resiliency in our force and the operational agility to respond rapidly. So while we may be sized against a relatively small set of missions, when you look at the 10 or 11 that are tasked in the defense planning guidance, we feel that, in fact, we are compelled to ensure that we are capable of responding to the needs of the geographic commanders in all of those mission sets. To do this, we informed our decisions through a deliberate campaign of concept development, wargaming, and experimentation. And through that study and asking hard questions, the Army has put in motion a host of initiatives. We have changed our organizational design at the brigade level to provide a more resilient and robust capability that's relevant across the full range of operations. We have strengthened our mission command capabilities to provide the Joint Commander a more responsive force and C2 capability, and we have aligned our forces against the regional combatant commanders so that they have Army forces even where we don't have them stationed. And as you know, we are becoming more of a CONUS-based force. Even where we don't have forces forward stationed, that those combatant commanders have Army forces that they can rely on to conduct the shaping and engagements necessary to accomplish the things I talked about earlier. And while ensuring that we formalize the key lessons of the past decade, we're going to continue to look to the future. As we move forward, we will aggressively challenge our assumptions. We will continuously examine our azimuth through the wargaming and experimentation venues and challenge those assumptions all the way through. As General Scales noted, I have the honor to follow in his footsteps. I was a part of an organization he created, Army After Next, which kind of challenged a lot of assumptions in the 1990s, and we intend to do the same thing as we go forward so that we don't fall prey to the mistakes of the past. And I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Now, for our audience, this is your time, and we'll open it up for questions in just a second. I ask that you make this a question rather than a statement or a declaration. If you wish to make a statement or a declaration, these gentlemen will be more than willing to hang around for a few minutes to talk to you, but let's restrict it to questions. Let me start off with a couple of questions. War is a young man's game. And we've had 10 years where mostly the experience of our force has been deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan. Some have said that we do well at tactical level of war, brilliantly at the operational level of war, and poorly at the strategic level of war. And yet it seems to me the circumstances of our service over the, over the last 10 years has been to focus on the tactical and operational. And I guess my question to the panel, beginning with you, Tom, is what are the services doing to, number one, excite young men and women to focus on learning rather than operations? And what is your service doing to retain and to educate those middle managers, those captains, majors, and lieutenant colonels, so that they're prepared to take on their strategic responsibilities in the future? Tom?
Wow, that's a great question. You know, I hinted at it a little bit when we started talking about the need and the ability to create strategic thinkers, critical thinkers, and I think that's exactly the point. You need to get out of the tactical and the operational, and you need to raise the game. Truth be known, in resident PME for our officers, our majors, lieutenant colonels, is a really small part of the Air Force. And for example, I think there are about 250 students down at Air War College. Only half of those are Air Force officers. So one of the things we're trying to emphasize is that's a select group. They get a lot of attention. They get a lot of education, obviously, and the rigor that John was talking about. But we're trying to open up that aperture to make sure that the rest of the force gets that opportunity also. And one of the reasons you can do that is distance learning has finally gotten where it can be a robust forum, and it can be facilitated, it can be non-facilitated. The IT's finally there, and you know, that's one of the focus areas. But the need to roll doctrine, the need to roll lessons learned right into the curriculum strikes at that relevancy issue too. You have to have a much tighter circle than we've had in the past, and you need to get the experts back into the classroom, and you know, and it needs to feed on each other.
John? Yeah, John?
Yeah, they say the best time to be at a war college is after a war when budgets are going down. So it's a great time to be there. So our work's pretty easy. We have the Warriors are coming home. Mentioned distance education. That's one area that we're really pushing hard. It's harder to move families, the logistics of that. To be truthful, I didn't appreciate how powerful our distance education program was until I got there. We just had our annual dinner last week or 2 weeks ago in Washington. An amazing group of professors around the country in fleet concentration areas. Our Distinguished Leadership Award this year is going to go to Admiral Winnefeld. Previously went to Admiral Stavridis, two admirals that are widely considered to be big thinkers and good thinkers. They did the Naval War College course by distance education. It's the hard way. I always like to tell it, Admiral Nimitz, one of our favorite admirals, used to look for officers who completed the War College course by distance education, because when they completed it, it marked them as someone who could really self-motivate themselves to accomplish something really difficult. It's a full-time job to make it exciting for young officers to want to come and get their education. My personal challenge to myself is I want young officers to believe that if they want to be the C&O someday, they should want to go to Newport. Carlisle's great, Maxwell's great, Quantico's great, but if they want to be the C&O, they don't want to be the chairman, they want to be a ship guy, they want to come to Newport. So we're trying to embrace our brand and believe that Newport is a special place. Mahan was a special person, Theodore Roosevelt, the people who believed in our maritime nation. So it's a full-time communications job. I mean, we're helped out mightily again by the Naval Institute with writing awards and writing prizes. Our challenge is to make the education accessible at a time when moving families, either because of the housing market or because of the employment schedule, is going to remain a big challenge.
Yeah, John, let me just push back on that for a minute, because I remember back in the days of trying to implement Goldwater-Nichols back in the 90s. The old joke back then was the Naval War College was always a place that a sailor wanted to be selected for but never go. I mean, or put another way, the Naval War College was this great jewel in Newport, but the Navy leadership would rather have you on the quarterdeck than in the classroom. Has any of that changed over the last 10 years? And is the regard for higher education better now in the Navy than it was back in my day?
We call it the Navy's love-hate relationship with its war college. I think it goes in cycles, and I think, like I said, there's a huge pressure to innovate. Bold Alligator, which Fleet Forces just accomplished, was a huge, I call it putting the band back together, getting the Marines back on ships. It's a constant challenge. If you look at a list of CNOs that attended the Naval War College, the first half of our history, every single CNO went there. 36 of our 38 flag officers. I mean, it used to be you had to go there. But times have changed. Now you can go to these other schools and learn about air power and learn the great strategists from a different point of view. It's part of being a joint force, which is one of the, Admiral Davidson talked about. It's a choice we make. We choose to be joint, and that's a choice we need to make. So it's going to be a challenge. Obviously, without saying it, if you look at more recently, our CNOs have not gone to the Naval War College. Now, whether they've gone to another college, which I would count that the same if they went to any of the war colleges, but did they get education? But again, I'm sticking to my guns that, Admiral Spruance, widely considered our greatest wartime decision maker, our greatest leader. He had 3 tours in Newport before the war, and his final tour was there. People like to imply that the best wartime leaders come from the people who expended the most ordnance as they were growing up. The history doesn't prove that. The people who have a balance of operational excellence and education prove to be the best leaders in wartime.
Yeah, John Carly, there's an old saying about the Marine Corps, turning a destroyer is a lot quicker than turning a battleship, and there's a great value in being small. And that the Marine Corps oftentimes has prided itself on leading reform at PME simply because they were able to engage the rudder more quickly. What's the Marine Corps, particularly Marine Corps University, done to speed up this process of getting your junior officers to get back to books and away from the field?
I'd like to answer that in two aspects. The raw ingredient that we're getting in the front of the pipeline here has never been better. You look at the academic quality of the young Marine officers that we're bringing in the front door. The fiscal standards have never been higher, and we like that. And going into this 10th year of the campaign here, the Commandant, General Amos, has directed that we go to maximum capacity, look at the most innovative ways that we can to bring young captains and majors through the schoolhouse in Quantico, and that's at the Expeditionary Warfare School, EWS. And it's essential because you're at a break point there as you bring, nothing survives in a vacuum. At that point, you're going into 8 to 10 years, that first cycle as you make decisions between your family, if you're going into civilian career, and you need to educate and offer choices there. And we have opened that aperture of access to EWS, and we think there's a careful balance there in distance education, but there's no excuse, there's no replacement for that virtual environment's good, but we think you need proctors and mentors that they're actually seeing in the classroom, and we've expanded to a more cyclic rate here just in the past 18 months in Quantico for the Expeditionary Warfare School and Command and Staff as well. And we look at those break points, and we think it's important that we continue to invest in that. You see a lot of construction in Quantico where we are today, and that is why, and we're making that investment. The second part of that I'd like to talk about is that about our enlisted Marines. The quality has never been higher today. I was just reading some data. 98% of our young Marines that are in service today are high school graduates. Many have college. The physical standards have never been higher, and for them to re-enlist at their re-enlistment break point, the minimum standards are there, but the mean is exceptionally tall for them, whether it be in their proficiency marks, and what we're looking at over the historical averages are high. The combat physical fitness test, physical standards are superb in those performance categories, and we could not be happier. The real challenge going into the future, if we have to go beyond what we're looking at, is, for instance, in a next fish, what we call a fish rig, which would be looking at the balance of our force for capability, would be what you take away in capability versus the numbers you have to support it.
Thanks. You know, Bill, they say that the Army's got the deepest bathtub. It's got the most to make up for because it's been the service that's been the most stressed by 10 years of war. What's the Army going to do to try to fill the bathtub while still preparing for the next war, while moving back to conventional war, or while fighting and finishing the war in Afghanistan?
Well, we do have a backlog to catch up on. We have, I don't know that I wouldn't say that we've borne a heavier burden than our sister services have. This is the point, we are joint by choice. But in terms of how we have had to choose between putting the right people in operational assignments in the field versus getting them in the schoolhouse, we have erred on the side of getting the right people in the operational force over the last 10 to 11 years. And that's been, that's a recognized deficiency. In fact, we had the Secretary of the Army down just 2 weeks ago to walk him through our approach, which is to identify those people, get them back in the schoolhouse. Right now, there is no indication or no appetite for any kind of a waiver for operational experience. They're going to get back in the classroom either through resident education out at CGSC at Fort Leavenworth, or through one of the satellite ILE programs that we have, which is a compressed program, but still has the instructors and the face-to-face time, and then where necessary, we'll rely on distance learning, but that's a distant third choice, even given all of the advances that have been made. And as the J7, I own the PME account, and I've seen all the distance learning programs, and they're all pretty good, but I'm kind of with Elliot Cohen. I think that teaching, particularly operational and strategic thought, history, and those kinds of things are contact sports where you need that face-to-face engagement. We're also returning to our pre-war standards in terms of education as a prerequisite for opportunity for assignment and command. And when we go into the strategic realm, particularly with the War College, we have similar challenges, not quite on the same scale, but similar challenges in terms of getting people into school. But we are also looking at a variety of different programs. There is still the ASAP program, which you started when you were the commandant at the Army War College, the Advanced Strategic Arts program. But we're looking at a series of other opportunities, including PhD programs, not for people to go be instructors, but actually come back into the force as strategists for the Army. And then, of course, we have a program, a career field called Functional Area 59, which is invested in identifying those people who have a knack for strategic thought and getting them into that program. I think most encouragingly, we've also done an Army profession survey here recently, where we looked at 41,000 enlisted soldiers, non-commissioned officers, warrant officers, and officers. It's the largest of those programs that we have done in the Army. General Westmoreland famously did a similar thing, but his sample size was only several hundred right after Vietnam, and we did one in the 1980s under General Sullivan utilizing a CGSC class. The important thing there is that the youngsters who are coming up, and I echo everything that my Marine partners have already said about their young officers, soldiers, and NCOs. I say the same thing about ours. They are just phenomenal in all respects. They want more Army. They want it to be harder. They expect to be challenged. They expect to be pushed through crucibles of selection, boards to go to school, boards for command, et cetera. And they recognize that the Army, and I think the Joint Force at large, has had to make some trades over the last 10 years to sustain the tempo necessary to succeed in these two wars. But they also recognize that going forward, as I say, as we transition to this era of preparation, that they've got a lot to learn to be ready for the next conflict.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We're open for questions from the audience. Please raise your hand and come forward. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Janice Marconi Works International, and also a corporate member of the Naval War College Foundation. Yes.
Hoorah.
Okay. When one thinks about critical thinking, there seems to be a little bit of fixation on black swans, tipping points, and outliers. But one of the things that I found is not well understood, and the Germans have wonderful words for specific things, is zeitgeist. And zeitgeist is the collective feeling or attitude over a period of time or at a period of time. And that could be the zeitgeist of those under command. That can be the zeitgeist of our allies or the zeitgeist of our adversaries. So how do you prepare new commanders to understand this concept of zeitgeist, which is so critical as part of critical thinking?
This looks like a Navy question to me. I don't know. It just has it written all over it.
Sorry, sir.
I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on zeitgeist, but we definitely teach critical thinking in all three of the primary curriculums. How to think critically. I mean, we break it down and talk about it, and we apply it. We're critical of leadership. We're critical of planning. We're critical of the outcomes of battles. So critical thinking is something that we embrace. Again, I'm not the expert on zeitgeist. But I think, getting back to my original point, is there's no substitute for long hours spent reading and thinking. There's no better time to be enthused about that than actually coming back from war or heavy operations. So we teach critical thinking. It's one of our tenets of what we're trying to accomplish. But I'll turn to my
Let me make a shot at this. One of the marks of great militaries throughout history is the ability to tolerate eccentricities. It's the ability to take the malcontent and embrace him or her and protect them from the traditional bureaucratic forces of a military service, regardless of what it is. In great armies, at the operational level at least, like the Reichswehr in the 1920s, I would argue the Navy in the 1930s, were able, and the British Navy traditionally, has been able to take guys that today we would think of as goofballs, but who had this ability to be an anticipator of unanticipated events, to protect them and to allow them to express themselves, and occasionally to grind them off. But any great transformative institution that's going to stay ahead of what you've just described has to build these little islands of eccentricity in order, I think, to be one step ahead of your adversaries. That's a great question.
Yeah, just one, it's not a follow-on, it's just an explanation, like, for example, social media.
Yeah.
Twitter, Facebook in Egypt could be a source of determining the zeitgeist of this time.
That's a good point.
Okay.
Yeah. John, did you want to say something? No? Okay. All right, next question. Sir.
Good morning. Petty Officer Gothi. I work in SACUR Strategic Communications. Excuse me. If you look at any reading list that Admiral Stavridis puts out, it focuses very heavily on fiction, things that are outside the normal purview of strategy, operation, or tactics. So I'm interested to understand what the panel's view is on education outside of strategy, operation, and tactics in critical thinking, things like fiction, things like the sciences, or even communication technologies.
Science fiction, too.
Even science fiction, absolutely. Ender's Game is on every
Ender's Game
junior
comes
reading
to
list.
mind, sure.
So,
any comments? Any great fiction writers or readers on our panel?
Some of it isn't what you learn, it's how you come at problems. And I think science fiction and non-traditional reading can help that. Go back to one of our favorite examples when we talk about critical thinking is John Boyd, who had the OODA loop and everything, but the OODA loop's fine, it's military doctrine, but he asked the question, you see a skier, you see a, I'm trying to think of a tank, you see a bike, and what do you get? And, everybody goes, well, those are three separate things. Well, there was somebody that figured out you can put those three things together and get a snowmobile. And you can put a bike in and a snowmobile engine together, and you can get a jet ski. I mean, you know, that's the type of asymmetric thought that you need to nurture, and I would argue you get that from science fiction, you get that from fictional reading more than you would of strategy doctrine and things like that. So, I mean, it is a mindset, it is a thought process, and you have to, and getting back to my whole, the zeitgeist, my whole point about critical thinking is it's fine, but unless you have an establishment that will embrace it or allow it, then who cares? And that's why the disruptive part of it is kind of what that's more of a warning and caution for the leadership. Don't shut these folks down.
Yeah. And you know, there's also a moral courage element of this as well. The commander, we're all rewarded for our physical courage on the battlefield, but when you become a strategist, there's also the moral courage issue, that is the ability as a commander to tolerate eccentricity. And having commanded folks like that, I can tell you that it does take a great deal of backbone to stand up for strange people. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, Admiral Generals. Commander Sue Dalton from Airland, currently at Airland. In the thought of being a disruptive thinker, I came in the Navy in the early 90s and finished a
of a cyber axe, realizing that cyber's in its infancy right now, and we have to put some brain power behind it. We're done with the org charts. We're done with figuring out who's going to do what to who's going to support the sub-unified or the eventual unified command if that comes to fruition. We need to really put some teeth into that. We need to figure out what the issues are, what we need to focus on, what we can control, what we can't control. And then once we get our act together, I think that needs to branch out to the other services, and I'm sure they are doing it. But it is a huge growth industry within all the curricula in all the schools that we have.
Yep.
If I may, it's funny the Marine's talking about this, so don't be scared. Tom and I were just in a course together, and it has, if you will, senior leadership's attention. We know, I think at the national level, we're doing many right things to further develop our cyber capacity. And as a waterfall effect from that, I think each component is looking at it very carefully, and we understand that it is a joint threat to us, and that we're aggressively moving towards the right schools, the right leadership, to make sure that we have the right answer. Not only defensively, I think we have a great defensive capability, but those areas where we will, it's like the advent of a gunpowder, if you will, and that's probably not the right analogy here, but the ability to conduct offensive operations is those things that we're looking at today and the capabilities that we'll have there and that need to be embedded into our operational and tactical regimen, because our adversaries will not hesitate to use it.
I'd just like to add a couple of things. One, our challenges are as much policy and doctrine as they are technical. And I can, without straying into areas and being carted off here, coming out of Afghanistan, I was very appreciative of the capability and very frustrated by the limitations in my ability to orchestrate that at the operational level. The other piece of this is, and I think, back to my point, my pitch, we've got to challenge our assumptions. So we have moved into cyberspace as a mechanism for command and control and a host of other functions. And I think the next question is, okay, so what's the next thing? Because maybe it will become too difficult for us to operate there, and we need to be prepared to shift to something else as we go forward, in addition to optimizing our capabilities and leveraging every bit of this for our own benefit and being able to crush the enemy's ability to use it. Clearly, most of our opponents do not have the policy limitations that we do in the use of their capabilities.
John?
Yeah, it's a great question. You asked what the services doing in the schoolhouses. Well, I was thinking of the Navy having 3 schoolhouses: Annapolis, the Naval Academy, Monterey, the Naval Postgraduate School, and of course Newport, the Naval War College. We're coordinated in the Washington level by what's called the Advanced Education Review Board, where the Vice Chief and the Chief of Naval Personnel bring us to Washington twice a year to make sure that they are doing everything they can to make sure we're resourced, which is it's really Admiral Ferguson who has a personal passion for this. It started when he was the Chief of Naval Personnel. So at the last meeting, what's the Naval Academy doing? The biggest building, maybe in the Navy, but definitely at the Naval Academy, is a $25 million cyber learning center. I happen to know one of the professors there that teaches, and the war game that they had as their final exam for a mandatory course for all students was pretty exciting. About the teams are divided up, they're given a computer language, they're given a project, and they basically take each other on, and it takes place over the entire week of exam period. It was really fascinating to hear about it. Monterey, that's our technical, Monterey is to AFCEA what Newport is to the Naval Institute. I mean, we're very proud of Monterey, but they've got the biggest tasker to prove in Washington that we are taking this seriously in the degrees that we offer and in the people that are subscribing to those courses. Finally, in Newport, probably, we are the most removed from being able to do something today other than thinking hard about it in our wargaming, but I just can't resist telling you that it's the book we give now when people come and speak. We give Cyber Conflict. Is one of our professors here, Chris Demchek, a brilliant former Army officer who's written a great book. But just last week, her seminar speaker was General Cartwright, who's speaking here for lunch. We had him for a seminar. So the Naval War College is doing a lot. We're thinking hard about it. I think all our Navy schoolhouses are seized of the matter, as they say in the United Nations. I think the biggest example is our previous Service Chief, Admiral Rufford, who's out there at the Hoover Institute now, combining the 2 and the 6 to bring those for that very reason, for the realization that cyber and intelligence, we got to get this a bigger seat at the table, and he's been successful.
Thanks, John. Sidney?
Yes, sir. We've heard reference back to sort of the interwar period, where the big ideas were, strategic bombing, carrier warfare, amphibious warfare, mechanization in the Army. What are the big ideas today besides, oh God, we have no money, which you hear a lot, but, I know there's interesting concepts people are working on, but where is the level of, where are the ideas that are exciting, that are engaging, the students and faculty at your institutions today that may, 5 years, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, bear the kind of fruit that those concepts in the 20s and 30s did in World War II?
Yeah, if I could just modify your question, Sidney. I know we're old friends, I'm sure he doesn't mind. It's what, at the early stages of this process of conceptualizing and envisioning, the phrase that most often used is hypothesis rather than question. What's the hypotheses that are, hypotheses, I guess, that are scattering themselves around your perspective, not just your schools, but your institutions, about the nature and character of future war? Where is strategic bombing, amphibious warfare, large deck carrier, aviation, and mechanization today? And anybody can grab on.
Yeah, I'll repeat. It's cyber for us. It's cyber. It's the whole concept of how is cyber going to affect and influence and help and deter what we're trying to do. And I think the other one that I just thought of as you asked that question is the role of RPAs, remotely piloted aircraft. I think we were, we have a lot of those going up to 65 caps in Southwest Asia, but it's a benign environment, and and I think we're learning some tough lessons. And where are we going to go with unmanned vehicles? Those would be the two that pop into my mind.
John? Either John.
John 1, John 2, that's great. Sydney, thanks for your question, but I will come back to you with another question. In these new concepts, exciting for whom? I think I would answer your question most directly looking at where we are over the next 5 to 10 years coming out of a 10-year major land campaign. And if you look at what the opportunities are and where we need to go, look at what we've learned from 10 years of war. Is it a single service or just military options that are on the table? We do not do interagency very well still. We're still trying to apply that apart. And coalition warfare. The experimentation that's going on with an exercise called Bold Alligator in 2MEF here out to 1 MEF and 3 MEF respectively, and what we're doing as a naval force is not just joint military operations, it's coalition warfare, it's discovering the interconnection with interagency and how we do that. Today, for example, in Southcom, we see the challenges ahead in the next 10 years, especially the challenges that you look at in the combating transcriminal organizations in Central America, working with our partner nations. It's not a military option. There's some wonderful chemistry there that you have to meet in the middle for the solution. And how do you address that, and how do you work that? We're teaching that in all of our institutions. How does the interagency piece go forward in being successful in solving the Rubik's Cube, if you will, of a fulfilling national strategy? And that's a challenge that we see in the short run here. Longer run, we look out there on the horizon where you look across the world and looking at the challenge to naval forces, exciting for whom, be exciting for the naval forces, and what we would, we would like to go back to a 600-ship Navy, Marine Corps, and what that does for us. That's not the fiscal reality. You look at the concepts of what we'll do in distributed warfare, looking at littoral combat ship, joint high-speed vessel, as we have go through the bathtub of where we will not have large deck amphibs and probably have 11 large deck carriers and 11 large deck amphibious capacity over the next 10 to 15 years. And I bet we have to exercise distributed warfare more efficiently. We know that there will be challenges out there in the littorals where the combatant commander needs access to and where our partner nations need access in terms of crisis response. So we see that as a wide open growth arena for us, and right now we think that we can work within the constructs of what we're given financially. So, but it would be a thin fight in that regard.
Bill, John, any comments?
Yeah, just two points, both of them having to deal with human. I think all of us, you know, the unit I commanded in Afghanistan had all services represented in it, by the way, including a Marine battalion from the 2-7 guy, great troops. The human aspect of conflict. Now, we have certainly had a lot of experience in interacting with the human population, and we, I think, of doctrinally and operationally come down on the fact that that provided us advantage in the conduct of counterinsurgency. It's our assessment that that same sort of approach provides us, that influence provides us advantage in all conflict, regardless of whether it's high-end dealing with something like Korea or some of the other lesser included offenders that are out there today or maybe in the future. So we have redoubled our efforts to gain a better understanding of that, and that's one of the drivers in the regionally aligned force approach that I mentioned earlier, is to get back out. Our young leaders expect it, they think it's important, and we think it's important from a strategic and operational standpoint to get back out and to be engaged with the human aspects of conflict and the environment writ large. The second aspect that I will talk about regarding human is the human dimension, which is really, from our perspective in the Army, we're talking about ourselves. And it's how do we maximize our number one, and I'm talking for the Army, our number one capital investment is people. We are an organization of people that is enabled by technology. And so our investment strategies and our approach to training and education have got to be aimed at optimizing that personnel investment. And a shorthand that I've used with other audiences is, how do I take the uber warrior, the 35-year-old special operations master sergeant, and his judgment and experience and bring that back and put it in a 25-year-old squad leader, so that we are able to get more output, because that guy with the physical capabilities, which we've learned to extend their physical life, we need to figure out how to accelerate the cognitive development and the judgment and experience components, the maturity factors that make him so effective and help our younger leaders, both NCOs and officers, become more effective, particularly as we have a wider range of missions to deal with and potentially a smaller force to deal with it. Thank
John, any comments?
No.
Yes, sir.
Good morning, sir. Colonel retired Dwight Thomas, U.S. Army, and a former student of my commandant here. Cool. Sir, to the panel, I have a two-part question. First, from the Gulf War through Bosnia and throughout Afghanistan and even Iraq, we've had some great successes, some tremendous lessons learned, not only by our servicemen and servicewomen, but also our civilians who've been involved, as well as contractors on the battlefield as well. I know that within each of the service and some of the schools, we either have centers for lessons learned or some type of repository where we gather these lessons learned, some of which could be called best practices for the future as well. Is there any collaborative effort to consolidate these lessons learned, to share them among the services, and has that been published anywhere? Any joint thinking going on in that area so that you have a central repository for those lessons learned? That's the first part.
Gentlemen? I think the answer is maybe. Isn't there a place, it used to be a place at Joint Forces Command that sought to do that. I don't know if it's alive or well.
The simple answer is yes. As the director for the J7 on Joint Staff, I signed a number of checks to establish a virtual repository where, not that everything would be in those servers, which are out at Fort Huachuca, but that they would be able to link back into the other, provide a single point of entry to be able to link into the multi-service lessons learned repository. So there is a mechanism for gaining access to all of those, and there is a governance body that exists between the services to ensure that we highlight the most important of those aspects, and that we maintain that connectivity going forward.
Okay. And,
Yes, sir.
sir,
You
second
had one
part to
more?
that.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
This is a follow-on to the cyber question that was answered earlier. With more emphasis now on technology, virtualization, what technology changes are being made within the various colleges and schools? For example, I know that one or two of the schools will be requiring students to now bring your own device, bring your own laptop, instead of that being issued by the school. What other technology changes are taking place within the schools, and particularly in the wargaming area?
I know in Newport, we don't require them, but we encourage people to bring their own iPads. We now, all our banker's box of paper, we've actually made a business case. It spends less money. They also have access. The favorite expression is the presence of iPads in the classroom has resulted in a, fact-free environment. It has removed the fact-free environment. In other words, people are constantly checking each other. They've worked quite well for us. Blackboard is a software that allows students to interact with each other. The classes I've sat in on, it's just amazing. They, 500 or 600 pages of reading, but they get to make their comments on laptop. All the people in the seminar can read each other's comments. We've embraced it for the delivery, not only for the business case, but also because we know that younger people learn differently, and that it provides another pathway for the way they learn.
Thank you, sir.
Just real quick, a couple of months ago, I was invited to the Woodrow Wilson School to give a talk on future warfare. And every student in the seminar had a computer open in front of them, and for some reason, every damn one of them was an Apple. And when I said something a little bit inflammatory, I know that surprises you, every student would immediately Google the question. So from an instructor standpoint, we're in a different world, ladies and gentlemen. Your penchant for BS has been greatly diminished by the cyber revolution. Is that it? Oh, I have to wrap up today. What a terrific panel. First of all, a round of applause for our panel. Just very quickly, let me summarize. Isn't it interesting when we talked about future warfare, our Air Force representative talked about technology and our Army representative talked about the human dimension. And our Marine guy was kind of somewhere in between. I thought that reflects respective service cultures. Some of my takeaways, number one, overall, I think, is the importance of cyber learning in our school system in the future. I don't think that we do anywhere near as much as we should, and that's reflected reaction to the audience. Second is the issue of not just learning, but teaching and learning as a career choice. I don't think any of the services up here have done all they can. None of us have done what we should to make going to school and teaching at school a career-enhancing profession. And finally, I find interesting in the responses of our gentlemen on the panel how differently they approach the institutional structure for higher education. Each one of them, Air Force, Navy, Marine, and Army, have a slightly different way to negotiate through this difficult problem within the Title X responsibilities of the respective chiefs. Each has its value, each has its shortcomings. And so I think perhaps one of the things that all of us should talk about as we go forward and prepare for the future is how to rationalize that and how to learn from each of the services and how to rearrange ourselves, because regardless of the difference in service culture, I'm convinced that education, professional military education, is common ground. And as we move into the future, in order to fill that intellectual bathtub, we have much to share. Paul?
Well, General Scales and our panelists, I want to thank you again for sharing your thoughts with us here this morning. Certainly lots to chew on, lots to think about as we go forward. I was particularly struck by some of the comments. General Anderson mentioned, how do we encourage critical thinkers without, harming their career prospects down the road? And I think that's one of the things that maybe we don't do well enough. and the other, I believe, General Scales mentioned, protecting malcontents, and one of the signs of a military that's able to think forward is knowing what to do with those people, knowing that you will need them at some point. So again, please join me in thanking our panel members, and hopefully we can continue the discussion with them one-on-one.